So, the last few weeks, we've been talking about the book of Acts and the story of the early church and how it grew and spread, and how the world tried to stop that growth by throwing people in prison or even killing them for sharing Jesus' message. Now, Acts has a lot of stories and characters that kind of intermingle. There's a big event happening in the early church over here. We focus on there a little. We focus on the characters over here and what's going on over here. And that just means for a Sunday school teacher, I have to remind kids of stories from last week or the week before. So try and remember a few weeks ago when Mrs. Sander was talking about how they threw rocks at Stephen for sharing the message of Jesus and killed him. How the priests did that. They introduce a new character there, and I'm just going to read that. They dragged him out of the city and began to stone him. Of course, they're talking about the priests dragging Stephen out of the city. Meanwhile, the witnesses laid their clothes at the feet of a young man named Saul. Okay, so we're introduced to a man named Saul the coat holder. And other than, I think, Stephen, I think he's the only one given a name in the story. Do you know how in a movie the credits come up and they put the characters with like all the lines and the names up at the top of the credits, and then later on in the credits you'll get like character named movie shopper number 3 or something like that? Well, Saul the coat holder, he seems to be at the top of the credits, so we kind of have a clue that he'll be important later on. But right now, Saul is holding coats for the priests as they throw rocks at Stephen, and he's watching. Then he fell to his knees and cried out, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them." When he said this, he fell asleep. That means he died. I mean, his body died. One of the last things he saw was the sky open up, the heavens, and he saw Jesus at the right hand of God. So, well, you get the picture. And Saul was there giving approval to his death. So take a moment to consider for a little bit what Saul just witnessed. He saw an innocent man get rocks hurled at him until he died for sharing a message of love. If he had any decency, he'd be sickened by what he watched. He might have wanted to start protesting in the streets to prevent it from ever happening again. I couldn't imagine seeing what Saul just watched and not feeling disgust, sadness, anger, but Saul approved. Thumbs up from the coat holder. Godly men buried Stephen and mourned deeply for him. But Saul began to destroy the church. Going from house to house, he dragged off men and women and put them in prison. So not only did Saul approve of the stoning of Stephen, he actually looked for others that he could drag off and throw in prison. So last week we talked about people trying to stomp out the message of God only to cause it to spread and grow. And the person stomping the hardest is Saul. And last week we saw a little bit about how well this worked, but Saul just kept trying harder and harder, and then he's asking the priests for permission to go to Damascus and arrest people he might see on the way there sharing the gospel. And so he's on his way to Damascus, and suddenly he sees an intense light. It's so intense, he falls to the ground. And there's other people there with Saul, and they're wondering what's going on. Only Saul can see this blinding light, apparently. Then there's this voice. "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" "Who are you, Lord?" Saul asked. "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting." So Jesus himself is explaining to Saul when you're persecuting people, throwing people in prison and murdering them, you're doing these things to me. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. So the men who were traveling with Saul, they could hear the voice, but they couldn't see the lights. But Saul was completely blind, so they led him to Damascus, where he sat and he waited for 3 days. So Saul didn't eat or drink anything for 3 days, and I think this is partly out of remorse. He's beginning to understand a bit about how wrong-headed he was. So last week we talked about how if you have a relationship with Jesus, he will talk to you. And one such man was named Ananias, and he happened to live in the city of Damascus where Saul was currently waiting. And Jesus appeared to him. Yes, Lord, he answered. The Lord told him, go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. In the vision, he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight. So Ananias is like, hold up. Saul of Tarsus, the coat holder? This is how much of a reputation Saul had at this point. People from other cities know just how bad a guy he is. And maybe you know somebody like that who's got a reputation. Maybe like a bully kid who doesn't even go to your school. You know about him from another school. It would be like that. Or maybe you understand a little bit about how Saul feels in Damascus waiting there. He knows he's made a big mistake, and he's got a reputation that he'd just love to shake, but he doesn't know how to do it. And whether right now you can think of someone you consider a bad person with a bad reputation, or you yourself have made a mistake and earned a reputation that you wish you could wipe out. Just pay attention to this next bit here. But the Lord said to Ananias, go. This man is my chosen instrument to carry my name before the Gentiles and their kings and before the people of Israel. I will show him how much he must suffer for my name. And that's the guy that Jesus specifically chose. He wanted to help spread his church, to spread the message of Jesus' love to the other kingdoms and their kings and to the people of Israel. This is the guy that Jesus sacrificed himself for, so that he may be forgiven for his sins. And even though Saul, old coat-holding Saul, didn't want to hear the message, tried to stamp it out wherever he could, he nevertheless heard it, and he was powerless to resist it, and it transformed his heart. And once he heard that message, he understood that he needed forgiveness that only Jesus could give. So Ananias finds Saul, and he touches him, and it's as if scales fell off Saul's eyes, and suddenly he could see. And Saul was filled with the Spirit, and he was baptized, and he went on preaching. And from there he traveled all over the world, starting churches in cities far and wide. And whenever he would leave that church to go start another one somewhere else, he would write letters. And a lot of those letters are in the Bible, and they're books of the Bible. One of these letters is known as the Book of Galatians in the New Testament. And it's a letter to the church in Galatia. And in there he's talking about his early days when he was persecuting the church. Galatians 1, chapter 13. For you have heard of my previous ways of life in Judaism, how intensely I persecuted the church of God and tried to destroy it. I was advancing in Judaism beyond many Jews of my own age. and was extremely zealous for the traditions of my fathers. But when God, who set me apart from birth, called me by his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son to me, so that I might preach him among the Gentiles, I did not consult any man. So he's talking about who he used to be and what he thought his purpose in life was, to stamp out Jesus' message and to protect the traditions and the old ways of Israel. And what he thought he was doing was right. Thanks to the book of Acts, we can see a picture of Saul before his heart was changed. And then later on, he changes his name to Paul. He's got a new heart, a new life, a new name. And we can see how God used him. And we can see that Jesus' love can change even the most stubborn hearts. And his message can't be stopped. And his sacrifice is enough to forgive even the biggest sins. Have a good week, kids.